Conference will now be recorded.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of Digital Law News. This is brought to you by Digital Law and produced by Anson Evaluate. So my name is Laura Spencer, and I'm apprentice solicitor at Digital Law UK, and I'm also here with my colleague Peter, who I'll just pass over to introduce himself.
Thanks, Laura. My name is Peter. I'm a solicitor and managing director at Digital Law, and we've got some interesting stories to look at this week. Everything from Freedom of Information Act requests through to the ever-increasing volume of ransomware and the fact it could be affecting geopolitical relations between the United States and Russia. So I will pass back to Laura to kick off.
Thanks, Peter. Starting with our first story today then. So this is in relation to a story on the Yorkshire Post titled "ICO Launches Investigation into Sheffield's Council Secrecy Tactics Over Tree Failing Stage." So the ICO has opened an investigation into the practice following a complaint by a member of the public in April. So this comes after the council actually commissioned a law firm called Bevan Britton to investigate the attempted use of legal privilege to stop emails entering the public domain via Freedom of Information Act requests, which was improperly applied.
Thanks, Laura. I think this is quite an interesting and also slightly convoluted story. So it dates back to events in 2018 when Sheffield City Council was engaged in the felling of quite a high number of trees in and around the city of Sheffield, and they came into a lot of adverse publicity as a result. People were being arrested, people previously of good character who were like, why are you cutting down all the trees, given that one of Sheffield's main selling points is it's seen as a green city with beautiful parkland, tree-lined boulevards and avenues, etc. So very high profile, very bad publicity for the local authority and the council and the council leader at the time. Fast forward, and it turns out that one of the campaigners made a Freedom of Information Act request asking what information and records the local authority was continuing to retain on this. And it seems that amongst the emails that were released pursuant to that Freedom of Information Act request, some of those emails have been headed had made out that they would not be subject to the Freedom of Information Act because they would seek to apply the exemption under legal professional privilege. Now, it is perfectly permissible to not disclose information pursuant to a Freedom of Information Act request if you can argue that this communication is legally professionally privileged. That would mean that ordinarily it could apply to, say, letters between or communications between a solicitor, a law firm, and their clients. That's what that is designed to cover. So things like, letters saying, this is a dispute you're involved in, these are the legal issues, this is your advice, and then the subsequent communications around that would be covered by legal professional privilege. It seems, though, that in this instance, there were a series of emails exchanged with high-ranking council officials, including the then leader of Sheffield City Council, that then spread to communications with the contractor involved in the removal of the trees, as well as the local law enforcement, and indeed then the council press office. And it seemed that they were trying to argue, all of this communication will be covered under Section 42, and therefore we won't have to publish it. However, if you're going to argue that, it then helps if you don't then actually proceed to disclose it to the person who made the request in the first place. So it looks like, if anything, they may have actually looked and thought, well, no, we can't hold on to these letters under those grounds, and therefore these emails will have to be disclosed. But even then, sometimes it's not the fact that you then did comply with it, it's the fact that you attempted to cover it up that is the thing that catches you out. And that's what the ICO is looking at here. So Sheffield City Council has already instructed an independent law firm to look into this, and then they're now facing a separate investigation from the ICO. And why this matters is because this then comes down to how you apply those exemptions. There are a long list of exemptions in the Freedom of Information Act, everything from legal professional privilege through to if information is, for example, commercial or confidential, not to mention if, for example, it's information that contains personal data. Third-party personal data should not be disclosed pursuant to an FOI request, because then you'll be in breach of data protection legislation. So you know, there's various things to think about before you just start arbitrarily dishing out emails, documents, and letters pursuant to a Freedom of Information Act request. So a lot of information tied up in there, and it'll be interesting the outcome of the ICO's investigation, because it might add clarity in terms of how those exemptions should be applied and how organisations subject to FOI laws need to be applying that legislation when they are creating their records, and then when they're reviewing those records pursuant to an FOI request.
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be interesting to see what guidance, if any, the ICO publish as a result of that. So moving on to our next story for today then. So this is in regards to a ransomware attack, and it's a story on the Daily Mail. So British firms were amongst millions targeted by Russian hackers Revil, who are demanding 78 million ransom. Experts confirm that as the UK government launched an investigation into the biggest global ransomware attack on record. So the UK government is seeking British victims of the Kaseya ransomware attack over the weekend, and which is the biggest ransomware attack on record. The NCSC has said that it is investigating its impact on the UK. And as I already said, they are demanding $70 million, which is £50.5 million in cryptocurrency, just to fix this issue.
Yes, thanks, Laura. This is a massive scale ransomware attack. As is always the case with ransomware, it is indiscriminate. So this stuff is just out there, looking for systems that are vulnerable. So it looks like it's ended up being designed in such a way that it's proved quite successful in taking down a number of US local authorities and corporations, public and private sector. But it looks like some UK organisations have been caught up in that as well, as inevitably will other organisations around the world. The scary thing is that a little bit like the SolarWinds attack last year, which piggybacked on the back of, ironically, cybersecurity software that users would have downloaded to their systems and then opened up this ransomware attack. In a similar way, this ransomware attack focused on a Miami-based firm called Kaseya. And as a result, there are at least, they have clients in up to 17 different nations around the world. And this Kaseya software is used to manage large IT networks. So therefore, anyone who's using Kaseya will have then had this ransomware uploaded to it. And the hackers, who are believed to, at the time, allegedly to be based in Russia and called Revil, they are demanding up to $70 million in order to resolve the ransomware. At the moment, each user's systems will be totally scrambled, totally unusable, and they're left with the option of either restarting their systems from scratch and potentially losing all of the data that is on there, unless you can rely on good backups and good systems that mean you can restore your system to the position it was in before that ransomware attack hit. But for many organizations, they simply don't really have the facilities to do that. It's estimated that this has ended up affecting organizations in countries including the US, Canada, Germany, South Africa, Colombia, a grocery store chain in Sweden, New Zealand, and 2 major Dutch IT firms as well. So there is a massive sort of cleanup operation that will have to be carried out as a result of this, and therefore it just, I think there have been a lot of ransomware attacks. The volume of them is up already this year, and this is now highlighting the fact that organizations very often think that they have got good security in place, but when an attack like this happens, it just shows that you are not invulnerable, and indeed things can still cause significant problems if you don't have the really good cybersecurity systems in place, and in particular, sometimes not having good backup systems in place that you can rely on if the worst happens.
Yeah, and following on from the back of that, the US and Russia have actually said they're going to be holding a summit on cybercrime following this attack. So American and Russian officials will hold a high-level summit on cybercrime next week, as businesses around the world scramble to recover from the latest ransomware attack. And the announcement comes out after, obviously, this attack happened. And the Kaseya's chief executive actually said up to 1,500 of his clients have been affected in all the different countries that they operate in.
Indeed. So then we get into the real world implications of this. Apparently, at the summit that President Biden had with President Putin in Geneva, that followed the G7 summit last month, there were discussions around cybersecurity. Russia has denied any involvement in the waves of cyber attacks that have particularly affected the US in recent months. But there is also, I think, the question of, is this actually Russian state-sponsored attacks, or is it just large hacking collectives that happen to be based in Russia?
Yeah.
Either way, the aim of this summit is to, I think, to try and get clarity on between the US and Russia on, well, is this coming from the Russian state? If so, what would the sanctions be if it were? If it isn't coming from the Russian state, well, what's the Russian state going to do about actually trying to stop these attacks taking place on its soil? So, or certainly originating on its soil. It is getting to the point that the fact that you've got large private sector corporations that are having their are clearly vulnerable to this, to these type of attacks, let alone public sector and potentially public utilities. So everything from the water, gas, oil pipelines, transport, health sector, education, commerce, all of these things are being affected by such wide-ranging cyber attacks as this, and therefore it looks like it's now really being dealt with at the highest levels between the governments in the US and Russia to try and come up with some coherent answers and a strategy. But I'm not going to hold my breath.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did notice that the NCSC have published their response to it as well. So I'm guessing they're probably carrying out their own investigation into the effect it's had on the UK.
Yes, and it will be revealing to see how many UK organisations have been compromised as well. Yeah. In particular, when it comes to the public sector and some of those rather vulnerable utilities, those items of critical national infrastructure in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on to the next story then. So this is a story that was in the Times, and it's saying that hackers on loose as 9,000 data leaks a year are recorded. So public bodies and private sector have suffered nearly 9,000 data security incidents in the last 12 months, with a lot more sensitive and private information being hacked and lost or accidentally given away to the wrong people than previous years. So data that has been seen by the Times lists amongst more than 500 organisations that have been hit by ransomware attacks, and a further 562 incidents of specific hacking. So the ICO have actually also reported about this, and they have recorded a total of 8,815 data security incidents in the year between 2020 and 2021. And the most of these breaches were actually in the health and education sectors. And over the past 3 years alone, police forces across England and Wales said that most of them have suffered on average 8 breaches a week, which is quite high just for one sector.
Indeed. Thanks for that, Laura. And I think the concerning thing here is that just the sheer volume.
Yeah.
I think that the headline to this article is a little bit of a misnomer, because it says, you know, hackers on the loose, 9,000 data leaks a year recorded. But so you might be forgiven for thinking that that's 9,000 separate incidents of online cyber attacks, when in fact that isn't the story. There are, you know, large volumes here of ransomware and cyber attacks, but it's when you actually go into the data, we've then got things like those specific breaches involving, for example, data being sent to the wrong recipient in more than 3,000 instances. Yeah. So, you know, that very often comes up where for example, the wrong recipient is copied in on an email chain, or say the wrong report or the wrong data is attached to an email that's then sent out. 10, 15 years ago, if you looked at the enforcement notices that used to come out from the ICO, it was always, hard copy, the wrong, care report being sent to someone through their local authority or healthcare provider. Now it's a similar thing with the email, and those familiar with not just Outlook, but virtually any email provider will know that the fact that you only have to make one or two keystrokes and it then presents an option in terms of who it might be that you're wanting to send the email to means that it is very easy for the wrong email address to be selected, and then the consequences of that are obvious. And of course, we can be looking there at anything from just the wrong recipient thinking, well, wow, I've now received this information, and they could have been copied into a long distribution group that they shouldn't have had access to. Or it could be that you've then got highly personal sensitive data that was attached to the email or communication in the first place. I think another key thing here as well, though, and again, it's sort of buried in this article, is that we aren't as well just talking about electronic online records. We can be talking about hard copies, and we have heard stories in the past of highly personal records ending up just in a skip, or just in external bins, or confidential reports that are lost on and mislaid on trains and in the back of taxis. I mean, in this article as well, it talks about just within this last week that 50 pages of classified information were found that were just freely available, that related to the fact that the Royal Navy was sending a warship off the coast of Crimea, and that the Royal Navy knew full well that it was likely to provoke a reaction, but those 50 pages were just left at a bus stop in Kent, which a well-meaning member of the public then passed to the BBC. So this still involves those sort of breaches in the physical world in terms of paper documents as well, and that very often gets overlooked. People think that data only applies to electronic data when it doesn't. It applies to hard copy as well, of course.
Yeah, absolutely, and that links very well to I think a story that we covered last week about people like MPs and people in the public sector leaving all their laptops in the pub and just on buses and things like that. Obviously, they'll all be included in this data as well.
Yes, and you're quite right to refer back to that, because I think the worrying thing when we get examples like that is just, really, is this still going on? I think it goes to the importance, once again, and I know we've talked about this a lot on our update, the need for not just clear rules about this, but also clear training. If you actually receive training that said, look how these other people have made a mistake, make sure it doesn't happen to you, it might get through, but clearly it doesn't, and people don't think about it, and then these fairly easy mistakes to ensure don't happen clearly do continue to happen. People do leave USB flash drives in places they shouldn't, when really they shouldn't be using USB flash drives in the first place, let alone then sensitive data on other mobile devices.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on to our last story for today then. So this is in regards to the ICO and a fine they have recently given. So the ICO have fined a transgender charity for their data protection breach, which exposed sensitive personal data. So the ICO fined the charity Mermaids £25,000 for failing to keep the personal data of its users secure. So this ICO investigation began after they received a data breach report from the charity in relation to an internal email group, which was set up and used from August 2016 until July 2018, when it was then decommissioned. So the charity only became aware of this breach in 2019. I think it's worth mentioning as well that obviously this the breach occurred between August 2016 and July 2018. So although there's probably 1 or 2 months overlap into GDPR, I'm guessing, the main majority of the breach was under the old data protection rules. So it's probably why the fine's a bit lower, because obviously fines have changed since the introduction of the Data Protection Act 2018.
Indeed, on that point specifically, Laura, you're quite right. The penalty relates to a breach which was going on from 2016, but then continued and was still ongoing when GDPR came into effect. So you've then got sort of a portion from May of 2018 through to 14th June 2019 when the breach is still ongoing. And I think that goes to the most upsetting part of this breach, insofar as we're talking about an internal email group that was set up. So lots of information being exchanged on there. But the security settings meant that over 700 pages of confidential emails were viewable online. They were not encrypted, they were not secure, and they contained everything from names and addresses of over 500 people, as well as the personal data of 24 people that was sensitive because it said how they were coping and feeling with regards to medical treatment, and another 15 where the information was special category data because it referred to the mental and physical health and sexual orientation of those individuals. So we're looking at quite a high volume of data, but also that special category data. And I think this fine, 25,000, we can think, well, you know, compared to the multi-million fines that we kind of expect with regards to GDPR, 25,000 will certainly be a not insignificant sum for a charity. And it's probably been calibrated to have an impact on that charity without that charity being forced into administrative problems, having to cease operating or to cease providing its services in a big way. So they'll have used the powers under GDPR to calibrate that fine quite carefully as a result. But I think a reminder that not all data breaches are as a result of ransomware or hackers. This is just the inadvertent, innocent mistake where someone hasn't checked security settings, someone hasn't understood the fact that through the email settings it was possible for this information to end up being viewable online. And that's where the problem has regrettably come in. But it's the fact that it was up there for 3 years that I think is most concerning of all. And that suggests that there was not an ongoing regular review of risk and risk management within that organisation with regards to its IT and security. Otherwise, they would have picked up this problem much sooner, as opposed to only coming to light 3 years after it became a vulnerability.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I think that's the main issue here. Like, obviously, charities might be underfunded and there's no excuse to obviously not protecting people's personal data. So that's probably why ICO have kind of gone a bit easier on them as well, with the effects that pandemics had on them in terms of like fundraising and etc. But not realising the breach had gone on for 3 years is a very long time to not have any inkling as to what's happened.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's everything we've got time for today. So we just want to give you a little reminder of the data protection toolkit that we've got on offer at the minute. So this is the data protection GDPR toolkit, which is for legal practices, and it's currently on offer at £99, down from about £195. So it is available in hard copy and digital copy as well. So if you are interested in getting a copy of that, you could just drop an email to admin@digitallawuk and we can get that sorted. Don't know if you have anything more to add there, Peter?
Yes, just to let listeners know and viewers know, this is our GDPR kit for law firms that contains things like forms, templates and checklists to help them have a practical tools and help for them when it comes to dealing with compliance with GDPR. But we've also found that this has been a publication that has been helpful for those in other highly regulated sectors. So those in education, healthcare, financial services, accounting have also purchased copies and found that it's been really helpful for them as well. So it's got sort of multiple different applications in that regard, and GDPR is very good at telling you this is the standard you need to be at, but it doesn't tell you how to get there. This publication does do that, so it's nice and practical and hopefully readable from that perspective as well.
Thanks, Peter. And we also just wanted to say a big thank you to Anson Evaluate for helping us produce this webinar. So Anson Evaluate, for those who don't know, provide a lot of training, consultancy, webinar training and things like that. So they can help you set up a webinar or a podcast if that is something you're interested in, or if you're interested in getting any training around data protection or cybersecurity or anything in that matter. You just take a look at the website and you'll be able to find some more information on that, as well as some very good blog posts as well that's been written in relation to some of the most recent issues.
Indeed, there's some really good blog posts up there, including ones on cryptocurrency, driverless vehicles, artificial intelligence. So some really good articles are available on there to look at, and also on their Anson Evaluate social media. So if you take a look on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, there's quite a few things there. And also there is information with regards to our forthcoming autumn CPD series. So we'll be having a series of webinars on everything from data protection to cybersecurity to social media law, and you'll be able to see information there and register. So if you're interested in finding more information on that, or if you're interested in having your own webinar or podcast, then do contact Anson Evaluate. We can highly recommend.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you once again for everyone for listening today. Just as a reminder, we do record these on a weekly basis, and we pop them up on our YouTube channel, our website, and on podcast channels as well, such as like Spotify and Apple Music. So please do check those out, and we hope to see you again next week. So thank you for listening. Bye.